welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Biz Blend podcast where business meets real life and hustle is always human. I'm your host, Sana, as always, and to all the listeners out there, today's episode, it's for every dreamer, doer, and digital builder who's ever asked, can I really do it all? Our guest today, listeners, is not just designing websites, he's helping bold organizations create lasting change through strategic branding and modular design systems. But behind all the professional polish is a deeply human story. A story about college dreams, entrepreneurial ambition, and the raw reality of burnout. From juggling multiple clients to ultimately dropping out to protect his peace. This is the kind of truth we need more of. So, settle in. This one's is not just about pixels and projects, but it's about balance, bravery, and building a life that actually works with you, for you, not against you. So, listeners, meet my guest, Francesco Hayes. Francesco, welcome to the show, and I'm really excited and honored to have you here with us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, and I was more than happy to hop on and help out to wherever I can.
Of course. And Francesco, let's start with your journey. I mean, before even college, in your childhood, if it's okay with you, if you can share, did you have that entrepreneurial environment or a knack for it, like a fire within you?
As I'd love to say that I did, honestly, but I can't say that I was really always there. I don't come from, backgrounds where there's much like inspiration around me or idols. I grew up in the south side of DC as a military brat. And so moved around a bit, but for the most part, I was out there and, it's not the nicest of areas. So it's not like there's many people who I guess for me to kind of look towards, but, eventually I'd say, you know, going through school, I did eventually find something that I was passionate about and that I loved and that eventually kind of evolved and transformed into where I am and what I am today. But, yeah, as much as I'd love to say that I did, I can't say, it was really there, but it didn't stop me from searching once I figured out what I wanted to do and, just the process of figuring out how to do that, right? When you figure out what you wanna do, the next step is just like, "All right, what's the plan? How am I gonna accomplish that?"
Yeah.
But, um but yeah, so, I grew up, um I grew up around that area. I High school was about the time when I learned that I had this, like, knack for technology, and, um, at the time, I joined I played most sports throughout most of my life, but I eventually stopped playing sports to join the robotics club, and so, um, that was a bit of a transitional piece for sure. Like, I remember one of my teachers was actually the coach of so I did wrestling for a bit, and he was my teacher was the coach. And, I remember when I told him, I was like, "I think I'm gonna stop and I'm just gonna do robotics." He was just like, "What the heck?" He's like, "Are you okay?" Like, he's just like, "I didn't realize you were this nerd," per se. But, you know, when I'd gone to I guess, like, I realized, like, this was a point where there was something that I found, like, this love that I hadn't had before. Like, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed sports and everything, but the camaraderie that I had being a part of a team, and then just, like, this passion that I started to find myself loving, being on the robotics team was, didn't really quite compare to what was feeling when I was on, like, a sports team, and so that's when I knew I was like, "Alright, I wanna go all in on this," and I think there's a lot more, I guess, more opportunities that it would bring versus just, continuing with high school sports.
Mm. You know, I find so many similarities in your journey, and my friend and co-host, I mean Avik, even he also didn't have a kind of an entrepreneurial exposure right from childhood, but he was also kind of fascinated by computers and technology.
Mhm.
This I'm talking when, coming from the millennial side, when the computer was first introduced in the education system. Right from that point, he was also kind of obsessed with it, and it kind of created an attraction towards understanding technology, building something, creating something.
Mhm.
So that's really, really endearing, Francesco, and thank you for sharing that. Now we move to the next phase of your life, which was um, running a business while in college. That's
Yeah.
really, really interesting. Um, so how did it all start? I mean, if you can summarize, I know it's pretty difficult in such a short time to summarize everything, but then
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. If you can share.
Yeah, of course, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, I was mostly agreeing with what you're where you're going. But,
Mhm.
yeah, the motivation that came behind starting the business was I had just gotten back from traveling. I lived in Spain, Barcelona for around 2 years. I was out there doing some service, and I then came back, and I was just, like, you know, figuring out what I wanted to do. There were a couple individuals that were in charge
Mhm.
of, this, like, service mission for the church that I attended, and they were very much entrepreneurial, and I would say that those were my first kind of exposure to the entrepreneurial lifestyle. One of them one of the leaders, she had started her own business where she would help dress high profile individuals for different press conferences and meetings. And she was very successful at it, very wealthy individual. And her husband, who was also a very successful individual, he was a very successful surgeon, and he was the head surgeon of a couple hospitals out in the States. And so I saw almost like this like power couple per se. You had the wife who was running her own business very successfully, if not more successful than her husband's side. And then her husband who was almost like an academic kind of inspiring side. And so, and I'd grown very close to them. And I remember asking them questions, with starting a business, what are some of the hardships that came with it? And I it would give me different tidbits, and after talking with them, I guess over just that time, I knew that when I got back, I wanted to start my own business, or at least to do something. I mean, back in high school, I had attempted to start a business where I was building computers for people, just within the local area, and, that was my first exposure to, like, doing websites and what it took to on the legal side of getting a business together. But when I got back and, now I'm like 20 years old, I'm just like, all right, well, what do I want to do with my life, right? Especially after being out there for 2 years. So it's just like, well, I really like technology and I really like art also. Um, and combining those two, at least in my head, the first thing it went to was web design and web development, where you have like this artistic side of software, but then you also still have the technology side of it, right? And
Mhm.
I was just like, all right, cool, this is what I want to do. But then I was just like, all right, but great. I now I need to learn how to program because before I didn't think I was necessarily smart enough to learn how to program. And then I was just like, all right, then I have to like find a job. I got to get experience. And then I kind of sat back and I was just like, okay, so I got to go to school. And as I thought about more, I was just like, well, we live in a day and age where we have access to like different forms of education, such as like, YouTube, just the internet as a whole, in all honesty. And so
Mhm.
I saw that and I was just like, okay, let me find a course online and just learn how to program and see if I even enjoy it. Because honestly, before I was kind of scared and didn't think I was necessarily smart enough to learn how to code. Um, and so I finished coding and I finished the course and I was like, wow, okay, I can do this. Like, I guess with most things in life, it's not, they can come across hard per se, but you don't really know until you give it a shot. Um,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, and then I was at this predicament though. It's just like, well, no one's gonna hire me. I don't have a college degree. Um, and I barely have any experience. So it's just like, well, let me just start my own business and hire myself per se. So I did everything and I started I built the website for my company, which is now Allow. And I eventually got my first set of clients just by networking with, close family and friends, and that eventually boomed into strangers and strangers to strangers, and eventually led me to, um, you know, where I am today. But the tricky part, right, and I guess where your question originally stemmed was like running everything in college, and so I'd gone to a relatively small college. Out in Virginia, partly due to my brother. My younger brother decided to go out to college, and so I figured I'd join him. Because the plan was never really to go to college because I was already doing what I enjoyed and what I loved. But I saw this as almost like an opportunity that I was missing, and so I always had this sense of like this fear of missing out. um, so I decided to join him, and obviously I was still working. Um, But, eh, I end up realizing that, like, we have way more time than what we really realize. And as someone who's younger and in college, I feel like that's very easy to say because you have this almost like this spring to your energy and your willingness to do way more. Um, but we really do have a lot of time. I managed to find a way to where I was able to scout out, like, and be very efficient with my times where I was able to still be a full-time student and still be able to get projects done with work, um, which eventually grew to where I negotiated with the school to where I was like, "Hey, you guys need a website. Like, how about you cover my schooling and I'll do y'all's website?" And they agreed, which was at first I didn't think they would. I'm just some young kid coming to some higher education. These are people with like doctorates and masters and everything. They were just like, "Yeah, do our website and we'll cover your schooling." And so at that point, I was just like, "All right, well, I guess I'm here for the long haul. I gotta definitely figure out, the time management side of like getting things." Because, in the end, as I was there, I learned that when I retire, whenever that may be, I'd like to be a professor. And that requires a degree. And so before where I had this mentality, it's like, oh, I don't need this degree. Now I was sitting there, I was like, wow, okay, I need to get a degree. But, but yeah, there were different tactics that I took with managing the business, but the biggest thing and the biggest hurdle was managing burnout because now I was stretching myself in different areas. I was stretching myself in like the educational side and then also on the business side. Now that there's not an educational side, but I was constantly learning, with a full-time school schedule. And then I was also having to learn and run a business with, we were a small team of like maybe 3 developers, but I was still having to grow because I didn't want to let it go because that was something that I loved and I was obviously passionate about. Um, and I think there are definitely times where it was tough, but I knew it's what I wanted and I had to do it.
Mhm. I feel that you have had this deep sense of clarity, um, direction, that where exactly you wanted to head. but at the same time, you kind of underestimated yourself at times. I mean, like uh, learning something that is programming, coding, self-taught. I mean, it's not a small feat, Francesco. And I really have a huge respect for people who go through unconventional methods and, they do it and then they, share their learnings, their teachings, their insights. I think that's
Mhm.
something which is grounding and at the same time very authentic. Um, I mean, it gives you the good and the bad side, both the ends of the coin. So I really, really find this trajectory, this journey very interesting. And then on the other hand, when it comes to entrepreneurship, uh, a lot of us we glorify the grind, the hustle, especially when we are young. I mean, it's
Mhm.
obviously required eh, when especially when you are young, when you are trying to accomplish something, but then also there is definitely a cost in there. And this moment of realization that you had, that something had to give, it's often where the real growth begins. So I appreciate you of sharing this.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, um, like I said, I feel like there's a lot of glorification that comes with entrepreneurship, but, and, it's I don't and I find myself talking more and more with people as I've gained more confidence with it and just with myself and who I am, which, just comes with time as we are people, right? Um, and more and more people will kind of come and ask just like, how do you do it? Like, what do you do? How should I go about things? And, in the end, it's just like, well, it's gonna be hard. Like, there's a reason why, like, for example, like when I'm searching and hiring developers, one of the first things that I look for is just like, are they passionate about what they're doing? Because, like, some of it's like some of the things that we will build and some of the things that we'll work on, it's gonna be tough. And like, life happens and there's things that you can't take accountability for or take not accountability, but you can't account for. So you really need it to be something that you love. That way you can kind of hold on to as you're going through life because it's going to be a roller coaster. Um,
Okay.
and I guess I was definitely very fortunate on having that sense of clarity of finding something that I did enjoy. But I'd hear now, well, what do you do when you lose that drive or lose that passion? And I'm just like, well, and there are moments where I feel like I've started to have that happen, and I imagine as time goes on, it's going to become more and more real. But cross that bridge when you get there kind of thing. There's only but so much we can tackle as people and manage. Um, and so I can only really deal with what I have in front of me, right?
Yeah, that is true. Oh, and let's talk about life outside of work as well, Francesco. I mean, you you are you said you are passionate about actually experiencing life. So, how do you create space for that with the demands of your clients? I mean, um, honestly speaking, it can be very uh, intimidating and overwhelming at the same time. Um, keeping up with the demands and keeping with the schedule, the pressure. So how do you find or make time for that?
Yeah. I think I'm gonna cop out and say it's different for everyone, right? Um,
Mhm.
but at least for me, as I've kind of gone on, what I've really learned is that you have to have respect for your own time. And what that means is pretty much setting boundaries because it's very easy. One thing, like, for example, when I was going through college, it was very easy for me to just wake up and work till like 9 p.m.
Yep.
But that's not realistic. And, we have this like glorification that comes in today's world of being like, you know, a sense of a workaholic. And yes, you have to work hard, but I think there's a difference between working hard and working smarter. And when it comes to working smarter, you know, that's where you're able to kind of open up that time to like just living. Because, what I found as I was doing that insane schedule, not always was it 9 to 9, right? Um, but as it was, I found myself like reaching that burnout quicker and living life less. And through that, my almost like my creativity and my drive and my skills were weakening because of that. Because just like most things in life, this required balance too. And that's when I learned I was like, okay, I have to have this set schedule where, I'm working from, whatever it may be. You can do the classic 9 to 5. You can do, all right, I'm working on myself from like 9 to 10, and then I'm going from 10 to 3 o'clock. And then from 3 o'clock to 5, I'm doing whatever. But really setting a schedule helps, and I think when I started to put that limit and realizing that, like, by giving up time that I would give to work to myself, ultimately allowed me to perform better. It was almost like it wasn't losing an investment. Um, and there are different smart ways you can do about it, like, one of the big drives for me to starting this business was, like, I feel like, we're thrown on this earth and there's a lot going on and there's so much beauty in it, and um it almost feels like a gift, and I honestly believe that this world is a gift, and if I'm not doing my best to see it and or live it, it's almost like mocking or just like taking a gift and not using it per se. I don't know if you've ever given a gift to someone and or been given a gift, it doesn't feel good, right? And so I see it as that gift, and I'm just like, all right, I want to live it to the fullest. And so, that, uh, you know, how can I do that? And that's kind of what earlier on with what's kind of started the business side, because, doing a business that would allow me to have that freedom. Obviously, it'd be a lot of hard work in the beginning, but, now I find myself with more time to being able to travel, obviously having the funds to be able to travel and to be able to go and do and see and, experience life and be able to talk to different people. Um, and just get outside, at least here in the US, but, outside the American bubble. Um, and so, yeah, and as I've talked, there's different people that how they balance and how they live their life and with such a tight schedule varies, right? Some people are very much, all right, I have to create a calendar, I have to have like slots on my day. Other people are very loose, um, where they almost like do a lunge per se, or they kind of just go with the flow. And I think
Mhm.
it's a matter of you as an individual figuring out what works best, because I don't necessarily believe that there's one way of doing it. But I think by trying them out is how you figure it out, which is why it's just like, start out by the most common and then work your way into developing your own methodology or finding the method that works best for you. But I very much agree that it's very important that like you realize like there's more to work. Obviously, like, you know, it's important and you should value it. But if you really care about your work, you'll care about you gotta look out for yourself, because you're the one who's doing that work, and you won't perform as well if you're not taking care of yourself in other areas.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would also like to add to this thing that, especially from a perspective of being an entrepreneur, um, and especially in the initial days of building something, creating something, the people whom you're working with, sometimes when we are building something, and we are kind of obsessed with it, we want to have everything with us. We do not want to hand it over or delegate to anyone else, because that's natural. We think that, I'm just a more perfect for this. It's kind of a fear of letting go of something. But then, if you are kind of, you are not running the business, but the business is running you, then you lose that, as you mentioned, that spark, that creativity, the looking at the bigger picture. that where exactly am I heading with this business. So
Mhm.
it's also a very, very important aspect.
Yeah, yeah, because like it, there's no point in it all. If like depending on the business, there might be no point at all. You have to like for a lot of people, normally working is to live, right? Um, but I feel like we have to live to work, as cliche as that is. Um, and I very much believe in that. And there's different ways to do it. Like one, a little, I guess, a way that I found myself doing it is just like finding and working on products that I believe in that
Mhm.
will help make the world a better place. And in the end, through that, it's allowed me to live more because normally a lot of times when you're working on products that are helping make people's lives better or making the world a better place, you're
Mhm.
normally interacting with more individuals and it's requiring this step outside your initial scope um, or way of living. And that's one thing that I found that is, kind of become a no-brainer with different projects that I involve myself in. Like right now, I recently came on as a founder for a startup out in the UK, and what we are specializing in is connecting people with healthcare clinics around the world for different medical procedures. So here in the US, we have a pretty intense healthcare system, and in different areas of the world, each country kind of has their own right. And seeing that, like, when I was first introduced and pitched this product to come on as a founder, I saw this and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is going to change so many people's lives. This is going to, like, I can see myself using this product.
Mhm.
I know of so many people that can benefit from this. Like, yes, like, obviously, I'm going to be a part of this. How could I be a
Mhm.
part of this? Um, and that's brought me to like, it's opened up a lot of doors to where it's allowed me to be able to live more. I find myself traveling more and meeting with different clinics and also getting to know different ways of life. And through that, it's almost, you know, I might not be coding all the time, but I find myself developing other areas that I can then implement into coding and or like being a team lead and helping, um, you know, run these projects that I wouldn't have been able to before.
Hmm. Exciting. Exciting. So before we wrap up, Francesca, for our listeners, they would like to connect with you. What would be the best way?
Yeah, so I recently started an X account or Twitter. I'm very late to that show, but they're welcome to follow me on X, and which I can go ahead and forward you those links. And obviously, my LinkedIn, I try and post projects often, but if anything, X for sure. I'm pretty I've been doing better about social media. It's not my strong suit, but I know it's an important thing, especially in today's world.
Absolutely. Awesome. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And thank you so much, Francesco, for this candid conversation. Um, I absolutely feel that your journey um, and success, it's sustained by self-awareness, strategy, and knowing when to pivot. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. It's been a pleasure to be on the show, Sonard, and look forward to
Absolutely.
the future. I imagine we'll stay in touch.
And to all the listeners out
Definitely.
there, thank you so much for tuning into this blend. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who's walking their own unconventional path. Until next time, keep blending purpose with progress and never, never ever be afraid to rewrite the rules. Thank you.